Our first pocket that we're going to be practicing is called the Besom Pocket. It has other names as well. You may hear it referred to as the jetted pocket, or the bound pocket, or the double welt. So it has many names. The pocket is right here. I know it's difficult to see because it's a black jacket, but the pocket is right here. It's closed right now because it needs to be pressed before we remove the stitches to open up the pocket. But it's done by actually cutting into your fabric and slicing it open and inserting these two welts, or lips as they are referred to sometimes. This particular pocket is a very large welted pocket. Traditionally, they're never more than a ½ inch, and they can be as tiny as an eighth of an inch, or a piped bound pocket is another process that you can use. On the inside of the pocket, you will see is the bag. And see here, we're going to do this a little differently in our sample, but you can see here how the pocket bag at the top is of the fashion fabric, and that's so that when you open the pocket to put something in, you don't see the pocket lining. This is cotton as the pocket lining. We're going to be doing our sample a little different way, but I wanted to show this to you while I opened up the jacket. So let's go ahead and learn how to do the Besom pocket. So the first thing is to prepare for creating your sample for your sample book, and it's also, of course, very good to practice, particularly since you are going to be cutting right into your jacket, and this is almost the first step. So it's really good to have lots of practice before you go cutting into your final jacket. So you're going to cut the following pieces. If you have scrap wool, even if it's not 100% wool, I would use that for this sample. I would try and make sure that you do it on solid so that you can really see what you're doing. If you don't have any wool scraps left over, you could use cotton or any fabric. Just make sure that it is solid so you can see what you're doing. I would stay away from polyester for this trial because polyester does not press very well with home irons. So I would try and find some natural fabric in a solid color to do this exercise. So you're going to cut one piece that will actually represent the jacket body. That will be 7 inches wide by 10 inches high. And this is going to represent the jacket body. Then you want to cut 2 jets or welts. They're called both names. They should be 6½ inches wide by 2 inches high. Same fabric. Then you want to cut your horsehair interfacing, and in this case this is not horsehair that I'm doing on this sample, but it is an iron-on. This is one of the few places that iron-on interfacing should ever be used. Iron-on interfacing is not a good thing for fabrics. It's fast, saves a lot of time, but it usually wreaks havoc on fabric that you use it on. But for wool and for welts, it's perfect because you'll see what I refer to as the little triangles can fray very easily, and this helps to stabilize everything. So I'll show you that when we get to that step. And last, you have your pocket bags. So you want one cut out of the fabric from the body of the jacket, the same fabric, or if you wanted to play around with it and have a coordinating fabric, you could do that. And then you want one cut in pocketing fabric. Usually a little heavier weight than muslin is good for that. Broadcloth cotton is perfect for it, and that you can easily get at Joann's or the Fabric Place. That piece will be 6.5 inches high by 4 inches wide. And those are the pieces that you need to get started. The next step is to press your iron-on interfacing over the area on the wrong side, obviously, of your fabric, over the area where your pocket is going to be. That's going to provide you stability. It's going to protect those triangles when you cut them, as you'll see in the next few steps. So the first thing you're going to do is to place your pocket on your sample with your tailor's chalk. So you can get out your tailor's chalk and use it on this and start to get used to how it works. You can see here I put my pocket a little too high on my sample, so I lowered it. And then once I've chalked it in, and in this case this pocket is going to be 5.5 inches long, exact. The thing about this process of welt pocket is exact is everything. So you really need to take your time and do this slowly. Again, particularly because you're going to be cutting into your jacket almost first thing. So it's 5.5 inches. I chalked. I also put pins in, particularly the pins with the decorative heads, so that I can see exactly where the 5.5 inches is. And then I go in and I baste using your basting stitch so I can see exactly where the pocket is going to be and the line that it is going to be on. So it's all very exacting. You do this on the right side of the fabric, and then this is a wool coating that I'm working with today. It's the only scrap fabric I had in the studio. So I can see on the back side exactly where my pocket is going also. And again, you're going to be flipping back and forth between front and back, so it's really important to know exactly where that pocket starts and where it ends. My next step is to take my two jets and I'm going to abut them on my placement line. So here's my placement line for my pocket, and I'm going to abut these right up against it. And on each side, just going to remove this one. On each side, I'm going to tack where the end of the stitching for the welt is going to go. And then I'm going to baste this right through, all the way through, at 1/2 inch. So I'm taking from my placement line a 1/2 inch, attaching my welt, right sides together, or my jet. There, I'll use those terms interchangeably. And I'm going to tack this down. Make sure you keep it lined up so it's nice and straight. And again, this is the kind of the nice thing about wool, is that it's very, very forgiving. And again, when I get down here, I want to make sure that I make a little mark so that I can see exactly where the end of the welt is. Again, I'm not sewing through on this marking point. I'm just picking up a little bit of the surface so that I have the place marked. I'm going to now do the same thing with the top welt, right side together. I'm going to chalk it at a 1/2 inch. So I've basted both sides. It's clear to me exactly where they end. The ending points are across from each other, exactly. So now I'm ready to head over to my machine. So in my machine, I'm going to put my needle down, and I'm going to put it down exactly in the hole that I have marked. So that's the exact turn of that corner, because you've got a rectangle here now. I'm going to come forward. If you back tack, Make sure do not back tack beyond the initial entry point, and I'm going to follow my guideline that's nice and straight. Get to the end, I'm going to slow down. My machine's a little jumpy. And make sure, again, it goes exactly into the hole, and this one is easier to back up with a back tack. Okay, I take her out. My threads, and do the other side. Now when I go in again, I want to go in right in that corner that I've marked. Each stitch, and that stitch, make sure it's directly across. See that the fabric sometimes will shift too, especially for wool, so be careful of that. So you want to make sure you're exactly across from the other, because otherwise your welt is going to be off. And again, a few stitches forward, a little back, and straight down. Slow it down when you get to the end to make sure you go exactly in that hole. I'm going to walk it, make sure it's exact. And then again, this one you can back tack. And now your welts are attached. You check the other side, make sure they're exact. So now I've stitched a 1/2 inch away from my center line for each one of my welts. My stitching lines are lining up perfectly. I'm on the right side of the garment. Now I'm going to flip this over to the wrong side of the garment. And what I'm going to do is, with tailor's chalk, I'm going to draw and connect my 2 points. And in doing that, I can make sure that they're exactly right. Then along this center line where my basting is, I'm going to measure in 3/8 of an inch and roll myself a dot from each side. Because what I'm going to end up doing is to cut what I call my triangles. I'm using pen, which you should never do, by the way, because I want it to be very clear in the video for you to see what to do. Now I'm going to cut. This is the part that always makes me a little scared. So I fold my jacket in half and snip it, and then I work with it singly. So I'm going right down my line, just to the dot. When I get to the dot, I am going to cut at an angle right almost to the point where the stitching ends. Not quite, but almost right to. I mean, get really, really close, like within a 1/16 of an inch. That's your trick right there. That has to be exact. Now, this side, same thing. Come down my center line to only to the dot. Don't go past the dot, and then straight over into the corner, and straight over into the corner on the other side. Make sure you get right in there. Again, wool can be pretty forgiving, but also, like in a coating wool like this, it's very, very fluffy, so it's a little harder to see. So that's your slashing. So I've just cut. I'm now going to flip it over again, and I'm going to turn my welts over and stick them to the inside of the jacket. And when I do that, one at a time, you can see right here your seam. And you want to give that a really, really, really good press. You're pressing it open. I'm going to do that again with the top one. Take it, flip it to the inside. You're going to see your seam allowance right away. And you're going to press that seam open. Give it a nice press. Pressing, notches, both extremely important. So we've pushed our lips to the back side. I want you to leave the triangles on the right side. And now I'm going to flip over to the back side. And there are the seams that I've pressed, the two seams I pressed. I'm simply going to take my allowance, what's left over, and fold it right over. I'm not going to fold it this way. I'm going to fold the lip over that seam allowance. And I usually stick a pin in so it holds it in place. Same thing here. I'm going to fold it over. So whatever your stitching depth is from your slit will determine the size of the welt. Does that make sense? So whatever I slit, remember I stitched here. This was my original line that I basted from my center pocket line. And then from that line, wherever I stitch, so if I go 1/4 of an inch, my lips are going to be very small. Here I've done a pretty healthy 1/2 inch, so my lips are going to be a little bigger, which on a jacket this weight would be appropriate. And what you're going to find is that you have, so you end up looking like this. You have just the tiniest bit of allowance there that you're now going to sink in and stitch. So we're going to go back to our stitch sampler and pick out your sink stitch. And what you're going to be doing is to stitch in from the end. You're going to be stitching right in the seam. Getting it started is always the hardest part. So you're coming right into the seam. I'm going to take a big one just so you can see. And I'm going to sink stitch. And then if that was smaller, obviously that. And that actually, you can see how it hides it. And then, you know, I've come forward, I go back. So again, I'm coming out in the seam. I don't know if you can see this clearly or not. There's my needle. So I'm coming back a little bit through the seam and then forward. So I'm sink stitching. So if you can't remember sink stitch, go back to either your video or your sampler or your PDF that I left you, and you're going to sink stitch all the way down. You'll see how it catches on this side almost right at the allowance. Catches about there. I'm going to do this all the way here and all the way here. Okay, so both sides of the lips. Sink stitch in the ditch to hold the welt in place. Okay? So now you've done your pick stitch or your sink stitch to hold your lips in place. So the next step is going to be to take the triangles that are here and push them to the inside. And you'll see your nice, beautiful, perfect square is right there. So the next thing we want to do to stabilize this with the triangles tucked in is to whip stitch the lips together. So I'm going to do it flat. I hope you can see what I'm doing here, but I'll hold it up in a second. So I'm going to catch the edge of each of the lips and just whip stitch them together. I'm using a nice bright color thread, which I always do. I kind of color code my garments when I do it, so I know, like, okay, if I see bright green, it can come out. If it is maybe, in this case, the white, it's something I want to double check before I pull it out. And then the color, same color as the fabric, are the threads that are going to get left behind. So that's just the way I manage it. So it makes it a little faster in the end. That's the problem with coating wool, is very fluffy. And you don't always pick up what you think you picked up. But these just want to abut. They don't want to overlap. They want to really just abut. And they stay. I mean, I'm sure many of you have purchased a jacket where, I know my husband, where I remember one time him saying to me, I don't understand why they sewed these pockets shut. I said, well, they sewed them shut to press them, but you're supposed to open them. But I guess not everybody would know that. So in this case, you've got nice bright top stitching thread so that you can hold them together. So it's going to hold the whole welt into place. And again, I forgot to put my iron-on before I started, so just remember that that's going to be behind there, so you'll have even more stability than I do in this. And my triangles are to the back. The next step, so I have my lips are basted together for pressing. The next step is from the right-hand side, I'm going to take my fabric, and of course you have a lot more here because you'll have a jacket, and I'm going to turn it over vertically. And what I'm going to be doing is to sew my triangle to the extension of my welts or my lips, okay? You want to tug on it ever so slightly. Don't pull hard. You'll distort, because remember, the seam that you're going to sew now is going to create this edge of the welt. So you want to make sure that it's nice and straight, but you also want to make sure that those corners get caught in there. So the super tiniest of tugs. Fabric is very thick. And then I'm going to sew a straight line, making sure everything's out of the way, the fabric's nice and straight, and I'm going to come down to the bottom. Tack there. Okay, and that's what it's to look like. And now when I look to the front, there, I've got my perfect square. So over to the other side, again, think of it as sewing vertically. I'm going to fold it over. My thread's out of the way. Make sure my welts are lined up. Make sure I get the corners. So I'm catching that corner. Catching that corner of the triangle is everything, then otherwise you end up with a hole in the front. There you go. Welt pocket, nice and square. The last part now is to attach the bags of the pocket. So this, if you just think this through, this is very simple. So if my jacket is being worn like this, I know that when I go into the pocket, whatever is attached to here, if I pull this open, you're going to see. So that would be where you would want to use your same fabric or coordinating fabric if you wanted to have a little bit of fun with it. What won't be seen is what is attached to this lip, because that will be against the body, so that won't be seen. So that is where you'll use your pocket bag, your cotton fabric. Okay, so we're going to attach that one first. So you're going to turn this over to the back, and then you're going to take your pocket, place it over the lips, make sure it's nice and even, grab it, and And now what you'll do is to take it from here, so your pocket's upside down, it's attached to this little seam allowance that's left. This is the part that you pick stitched together, and now you're going to pick up that little piece of seam allowance that's left. Grab them and turn them over. I don't really use pins very much because I find them to get more in the way than to be helpful. But if a fabric is slippery, yes. So then I'm just going to take my pocket bag and my jacket seam allowance, my pocket seam allowance, and sew them together. The seam allowance does not make a difference on this. I just grab it kind of in the center. Okay. Now, from this side you can see, press it all down so that it's all downwards. Okay, now you're going to attach the pocket bag that's of the fashion fabric. That's going to get attached to this seam allowance here, but that's not going to turn, so you're going to put right sides together here. That one's not going to turn, but what it does want to do is to line up with the rest of the pocket. Now it won't line up at the bottom, but by line up I mean in the vertical direction. So again, I'm going to grab it and flip it so I can see what I'm sewing. Again, I could not have picked a worse fabric to demonstrate this, but at this point it's happening. And if anybody's using coating wool, you know you get a little bit of a challenge in some ways, and in some ways it's kind of more forgiving because it's so mushy. Okay, so I've got my two pocket bags attached. So I've sewn my pocket bags, the top to the top lip. This is the right side of the fabric, so when I see inside the jacket, I see the right side. I've sewn my lower bag upside down, and make sure that they all, at this point, everything should just about line up perfectly. So this is the 6.5 direction, and this is the 6 inch direction. Okay, and you'll see you'll have too much for your pocket. So you're going to be able to, the nice thing, again, this is actually partially a couture method of doing the welt pocket, in that now I can actually decide about my shape. So this will get cut off, but the one thing that you want to pay attention to on pockets is that you always want to round the corner, because if you make a straight corner, stuff gets stuck in there. Lint can catch, crumbs, things get stuck in there. So you want to make sure that you round the corner when you go to sew. So now that I know everything is lined up, I don't have to make any adjustments. It's a tiny little bit here, but now I can go ahead and just cut this off. And now what I'm going to do is to flip it over again, turn it, and stitch everything together, down, over, and up. And I'm going to stay away from my triangles. I'm going to sew right to the left of them. Sometimes, depending on what shape I have, I'll even come out here a little bit. This little unstitched part can just be abutted. It's not going to cause any problems. So I'm going down, around the corner, around, and back up to the top. So give it a good press, There's my pocket bag. Pressed it from the outside when I remove my stitching. When I open my pocket, what I see is the back of the fabric, and my bag is down there, and I'm good to go. And that's your welt pocket, also called the Besom Pocket, also called the jet pocket.